There's a man you know. Maybe he's your neighbor, your co-worker, the guy at the gym who nods politely and keeps to himself. He's calm, measured, never raises his voice. He seems almost too peaceful, too controlled, like still water that runs impossibly deep. People mistake his quietness for weakness, his composure for passivity, his peace for an absence of power. They have no idea what they're looking at. They don't realize that beneath that serene surface lies something far more dangerous than the loud, aggressive men who telegraph their threats from a mile away. Carl Jung understood this paradox better than perhaps any psychologist in history. He knew that the most peaceful men aren't peaceful because they lack the capacity for violence or destruction. They're peaceful because they've integrated their shadow. They've made peace with the monster that lives inside them, and they've learned to control forces that would consume lesser men. This is the truth that modern society desperately wants to ignore, that real peace doesn't come from the absence of danger, but from the mastery of it. The truly peaceful man isn't the one who's never felt rage, never contemplated destruction, never stared into the abyss of his own capacity for darkness. That's not peace, that's naivety. That's a child who's never been tested, never been pushed to his limits, never had to confront what he's actually capable of when everything he loves is threatened. No, the peaceful man Jung described is something else entirely. He's the man who's descended into his own psychological hell, who's confronted every demon lurking in his unconscious, who's acknowledged the beast within and learned its language. He's made a deal with his own darkness, not to suppress it or pretend it doesn't exist, but to integrate it into his conscious personality. And that integration is what makes him truly formidable. Think about the men who scare you most in real life. They're not the ones who are constantly aggressive, constantly posturing, constantly trying to prove how tough they are. Those men are predictable, transparent, easy to read, and easier to avoid. The men who should actually concern you are the quiet ones, the ones with that unsettling calmness, the ones who seem to exist in a different frequency than everyone around them. These are the men who've done the inner work that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Jung called this inner work individuation, the process of integrating all aspects of your personality, including the parts you've been taught to deny, repress, or project onto others. And chief among these denied aspects is what Jung termed the shadow, the repository of everything you've deemed unacceptable about yourself. Your capacity for violence, for cruelty, for selfishness, for destruction. These qualities don't disappear just because you refuse to acknowledge them. They don't evaporate because you've decided you're a good person who would never do such things. They simply go underground, into your unconscious where they operate autonomously, often sabotaging your conscious intentions and erupting at the worst possible moments. The man who hasn't integrated his shadow is at the mercy of it. His darkness controls him precisely because he refuses to control it. He'll have outbursts he can't explain, engage in behaviors that contradict his self-image, project his own unacknowledged qualities onto others with self-righteous fury. He's a puppet dancing on strings he can't see, strings pulled by the parts of himself he's disowned. But the man who has done the shadow work, who has descended into his own underworld and returned with treasure, that man is something different. He knows exactly what he's capable of. He's looked at his capacity for evil and hasn't turned away. He's acknowledged that under the right circumstances, or the wrong ones, he could do terrible things. And rather than being horrified by this knowledge and burying it deeper, he's integrated it. He's made it part of his conscious awareness. This is what makes him peaceful. Not the absence of violent capability, but the conscious choice not to exercise it. His peace isn't the peace of the lamb, it's the peace of the wolf who's decided not to hunt. And everyone around him can sense it, even if they can't articulate what they're sensing. There's a weight to his presence, a density to his energy. When he speaks, people listen, not because he's loud, but because his words carry the gravity of someone who truly knows himself. Jung observed that modern civilization tries to produce men who are harmless, domesticated, thoroughly socialized creatures who've had all their rough edges sanded down. We raise boys to be nice, to never fight, to always share, to suppress any impulse toward aggression or dominance. We medicate them when they show too much energy. We punish them for roughhousing. We teach them that their masculine instincts are toxic. that their natural drives toward competition and hierarchy are problematic, that the very qualities that made their ancestors survive and thrive are now personality defects that need correction. And what does this produce? It produces weak men. Not peaceful men, but weak men. Men who've never tested themselves, never faced real adversity, never had to access the primal parts of their nature. Men who confuse niceness with goodness, compliance with virtue, passivity with enlightenment. These men aren't safe to be around because they're so peaceful. They're dangerous because they're so weak. They're dangerous because they haven't integrated their shadow. They've simply repressed it so thoroughly that they have no relationship with it whatsoever. And when that shadow finally erupts, and it always eventually erupts, it comes out in the most destructive ways possible. The man who's never acknowledged his capacity for violence doesn't become incapable of violence. He becomes capable of unconscious violence, uncontrolled violence, violence that shocks even himself because he's so disconnected from that part of his nature. This is why the seemingly nicest guys sometimes commit the most horrific acts. This is why the man everyone describes as quiet and polite turns out to be capable of unspeakable things. He wasn't integrating his darkness, he was repressing it, and repression always leads to explosion. The truly peaceful man that Jung described is the opposite of this. He's not repressing his capacity for destruction. He's fully aware of it. He's faced it, acknowledged it, and brought it under conscious control. He could be violent. He could be dangerous. He could unleash hell if he chose to, but he chooses not to. And that choice, made from a position of strength rather than weakness, is what creates genuine peace. There's a story Jung told about a patient who came to him plagued by violent fantasies. The man was terrified of these fantasies, convinced they meant he was secretly a monster, that at any moment he might act on these terrible thoughts. Jung's response wasn't to help him suppress these fantasies or convince him they weren't real. Instead, Jung encouraged him to fully explore them, to go into them consciously, to understand where they came from and what they represented. The result? As the man integrated these shadow aspects, as he stopped fighting them and started understanding them, the fantasies lost their compulsive quality. They stopped controlling him because he was no longer controlled by his fear of them. He became, paradoxically, more peaceful by fully acknowledging his capacity for violence. This is the path that creates truly dangerous men in the Jungian sense. Not men who are dangerous because they're out of control, but men who are dangerous because they're fully in control. Men who have faced every demon in their psychological basement and emerged victorious. Men who know exactly what they're capable of and have made the conscious choice about how to direct that capability. What's your city right now? Where are you watching this from? I'm asking because this concept of the peaceful but dangerous man exists across all cultures, but modern Western society has particularly lost touch with this wisdom. We've become so focused on eliminating danger that we've forgotten how to cultivate controlled danger, channeled danger, integrated danger. And the result is a society full of men who are either overtly aggressive and out of control, or completely domesticated and weak, with almost nothing in between. The martial arts traditions understood this perfectly. The greatest masters weren't the most aggressive fighters. They were the calmest, most centered individuals you'd ever meet. But their calmness came from absolute confidence in their ability to handle any physical threat. They didn't need to posture or prove anything because they had nothing to prove. Their peace was earned through thousands of hours of training, through confronting their fear, through testing themselves against worthy opponents. They were peaceful because they were dangerous, not in spite of it. Jung would say these masters had integrated their warrior archetype, the shadow aspect that modern men are taught to deny. They'd brought the warrior into consciousness, trained it, refined it, and placed it under the command of their higher self. The warrior was still there, still accessible, but it served them rather than controlling them. This is the difference between a man who's domesticated and a man who's civilized. The domesticated man has had his dangerous qualities beaten out of him, suppressed through social conditioning, medicated into submission. He's safe in the way that a declawed cat is safe, not because he's mastered himself, but because he's been neutered. The civilized man, in Jung's sense, has all his dangerous qualities intact, but has learned when and how to deploy them appropriately. He's integrated his shadow, not eliminated it. Modern psychology has largely abandoned this wisdom in favor of a sanitized version of mental health that seeks to eliminate all darkness rather than integrate it. We're told that healthy people don't have violent thoughts, don't struggle with rage, don't fantasize about destruction. We're told these are symptoms of pathology that need treatment. But Jung would say the opposite. He'd say these thoughts and impulses are natural, universal, and the real pathology is in denying them. The shadow doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It grows stronger. It becomes more autonomous. It starts making decisions for you in ways you don't even recognize. The man who insists he's never angry is probably seething with unconscious rage that leaks out in passive-aggressive behavior, in jokes that cut deep, in sudden explosions over minor provocations that shock everyone, including himself. The man who prides himself on being nice is often manipulative in ways he can't see, using his niceness as a currency to purchase validation and avoid confrontation. The man who claims he's never had a violent thought is storing up violence in his unconscious that will eventually find expression in depression turned inward or in sudden outbursts that seem to come from nowhere. Jung's approach was radically different. He said, face it, acknowledge it, bring it into consciousness, have a relationship with your shadow, know what you're capable of, and then, from that position of self-knowledge, make conscious choices about how to be in the world. This is how you create a man who is genuinely peaceful, but also genuinely dangerous. He's peaceful because he's made a conscious choice for peace, not because he's incapable of anything else. And that choice, made from strength, carries a moral weight that the forced compliance of the domesticated man never could. Think about the men throughout history who've embodied this principle. They weren't pacifists in the modern sense, refusing to engage in conflict as a matter of ideology. They were men fully capable of devastating violence who chose restraint as the higher path. The samurai who spent decades mastering the art of the sword, but hoped to never draw it. The warrior monks who could kill with their bare hands but dedicated themselves to peace. The quiet protectors who never sought conflict, but ended it decisively when it found them. These men commanded respect, not despite their capacity for violence, but because of it. Everyone understood that their peace was chosen, not imposed. Their restraint was strength, not weakness. Their calmness came from confidence, not from naivety about the world's dangers. And this made them far more effective peacekeepers than any amount of domesticated niceness ever could. There's a scene that plays out regularly in the modern world that illustrates this perfectly. A situation escalates toward violence. The loud, aggressive man is shouting, posturing, trying to intimidate everyone around him. Most people back away, frightened or uncertain. But then there's one man who doesn't back away. He doesn't escalate either. He simply stands there, calm, centered, looking the aggressor directly in the eye. And something about his presence changes the entire dynamic. The aggressor can sense it. Some primal part of his brain recognizes that this quiet man is not prey. This is not someone to be trifled with. And often the situation de-escalates right there, without a word being spoken, without a hand being raised. This is the power of integrated shadow. This is what it looks like when a man has done the inner work. He doesn't need to prove his strength because his strength is self-evident. He doesn't need to threaten because his capability is assumed. He doesn't need to fight because his willingness to fight if necessary emanates from every cell of his being. Jung called this phenomenon numinosity, a quality of psychological presence that commands attention and respect without effort. And it's only possible when someone has integrated their shadow, when they've made peace with their own capacity for darkness. The men who lack this quality, who seem diminished or insubstantial despite their physical presence, are men who've disowned essential parts of themselves. They're walking around incomplete, with their shadow split off and projected onto others, with their power denied and repressed. And everyone can sense it, even if unconsciously. People don't respect these men, even if they're nice. Women aren't attracted to them, even if they're considerate. Other men don't take them seriously, even if they're competent. Because at some fundamental level, everyone recognizes that these men haven't done the work. They haven't faced themselves. They're operating at half capacity because they've disowned half of who they are. The process of shadow integration isn't comfortable. It requires you to acknowledge thoughts and impulses you've spent your whole life denying. It requires you to admit that you're capable of things you've always projected onto bad people. It requires you to sit with the uncomfortable truth that under different circumstances, you could be the villain in someone else's story. You could be cruel. You could be selfish. You could cause tremendous harm. This doesn't mean you will do these things. It means you could. And acknowledging that you could is the first step toward ensuring that you won't. Because once you've integrated these shadow aspects, once you've brought them into consciousness, they're no longer controlling you from the darkness. You're controlling them from the light. Jung believed that the greatest danger comes not from people who acknowledge their capacity for evil, but from people who deny it. The person who insists they could never do terrible things is the person most likely to do terrible things, because they have no conscious relationship with that part of themselves. They're vulnerable to being possessed by their shadow, to having it take over and act through them while their conscious mind watches in horror, unable to understand what's happening. History bears this out repeatedly. The most horrific atrocities aren't committed by people who see themselves as evil. They're committed by people who see themselves as good, righteous, on the right side of history. They've projected all their shadow onto some external enemy, and once they've done that, there's no limit to the cruelty they can justify. Because in their minds, they're not being cruel, they're fighting evil. They're not being destructive, they're purifying the world. This is what happens when the shadow remains unintegrated and gets projected outward. The peaceful man that Jung described has done the opposite. He's withdrawn his projections. He's acknowledged that the evil he sees in the world exists first within himself. Not that he's acting on it, but that he's capable of it. And this acknowledgement creates humility, compassion, and genuine morality, rather than the brittle, self-righteous morality of the person who's certain they could never do wrong. There's a famous Jung quote that captures this perfectly. Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. The peaceful man has embodied his shadow. He's brought it into the light. He's looked at every dark corner of his psyche and said, yes, this is also me. And paradoxically, this makes him lighter, more integrated, more whole. While the man who denies his shadow carries it as an unconscious weight, a burden he doesn't even know he's carrying, affecting every decision and relationship without his awareness. The truly dangerous man, in the best sense of that word, knows himself completely. He's not split. He's not at war with himself. He's not using half his energy to repress the other half. He's integrated, whole, complete, and this integration gives him access to power that fragmented men can never touch. He can be gentle without being weak. He can be kind without being naive. He can be peaceful without being passive, because his peace comes from strength, his gentleness from choice, his kindness from abundance rather than fear. This is why the most peaceful men are also the most dangerous. Not because they're secretly violent or unstable, but because they have full access to their capacity for force and have consciously chosen restraint. They're dangerous because they're complete. They're dangerous because they know themselves. They're dangerous because they've integrated what most men spend their lives running from. And on some level, everyone around them can sense this completeness, this integration, this quiet power that needs no announcement. The man who's truly done this work doesn't need to tell you he's dangerous. You know it instinctively. It's in his eyes, in his bearing, in the quality of his presence. He's not trying to intimidate anyone, but intimidation is often the result anyway, because integrated wholeness is inherently intimidating to people who are fragmented and at war with themselves. These are the men who can walk through a dangerous neighborhood at night and somehow never get targeted. These are the men who can enter a conflict and immediately change its trajectory through sheer presence. These are the men who command respect without demanding it, who lead without trying to control, who protect without becoming aggressive. They've mastered what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposites in consciousness simultaneously, without being torn apart by them. They can be peaceful and dangerous, gentle and strong, kind and fierce, all at the same time, because they've integrated these seeming contradictions into a unified whole. And this is the ultimate goal of Jungian psychology, not to eliminate any part of yourself, not to become some sanitized, socially acceptable version of a human, but to integrate everything you are, light and shadow, into a conscious, cohesive personality that's capable of responding appropriately to any situation. The peaceful, dangerous man doesn't react from unconscious programming. He responds from conscious choice. When gentleness is appropriate, he's gentle. When fierceness is required, he's fierce. When patience serves, he's patient. When decisive action is necessary, he acts. He has full access to his entire personality, including the parts most men have disowned, and this gives him a flexibility and capability that domesticated men simply don't possess. Jung would say this is what it means to be truly individuated, to have done the work of becoming consciously yourself, rather than remaining an unconscious bundle of social conditioning and repressed drives. And the path to individuation runs directly through the shadow. You cannot become whole without integrating your darkness. You cannot become genuinely peaceful without acknowledging your capacity for violence. You cannot be truly good without recognizing your potential for evil. This is the paradox at the heart of Jungian psychology, that wholeness requires embracing what we've been taught to reject, that peace requires integrating our capacity for destruction, that genuine morality requires acknowledging our potential for immorality. The men who understand this, who've done this work, who've descended into their own psychological underworld and returned with the treasure of self-knowledge, these are the men who change the world. Not through aggression or force, but through the sheer power of integrated presence. Drop a comment right now with this exact phrase: I embrace my shadow. Write those 3 words and let them mark the beginning of your own journey toward integration, toward wholeness, toward becoming the kind of man who's genuinely peaceful, because he's genuinely dangerous. Say it publicly as your commitment to stop running from the parts of yourself you've been taught to deny, to start doing the work that transforms boys into men and men into forces of nature. Subscribe to this channel because the journey toward integrated masculinity is long, and most men need guides who aren't afraid to speak uncomfortable truths. Hit that like button because this message directly contradicts everything modern psychology tells you about eliminating your darkness, and it needs to reach the men who are ready to hear it. What's coming in the next video will take this even deeper into territory that makes people profoundly uncomfortable, revealing the specific mechanism that keeps men trapped in weakness, and how the greatest philosophers understood what modern society has forgotten. You'll discover why the qualities you've been taught to suppress are actually the keys to your greatest power, and why reclaiming them might be the most important thing you ever do. That video is coming soon, and the men who are ready for the next level of truth need to be here when it drops.